Hi, and welcome to this module on group norms or team norms. This is something that deserves some attention because, as anyone knows who's been part of a team or a group in any context, certain behavior is condoned and supported and certain behavior is not. Sometimes it's written down, typically it isn't. Sometimes it's discussed, sometimes it's not discussed. Sometimes people are aware of these behaviors that are supported or the ones that aren't supported, and sometimes they're not discussed. Sometimes they're much more in the group's unconscious. Why this is really important is because any team we're involved with, any group we're involved with, usually has some kind of a purpose, a reason for being together. And so what you want to be able to do is support the norms, what we consider to be the team normal behavior, what is accepted as normal, so that we can fulfill the goals of the team, certainly. Some teams are better at this than others. We often see pro sports teams address this sometimes more visibly than corporate teams because in sports the activities of the team are much more visible. And so we're going to take a look at norms now, the fundamentals, and look at some examples of norms that are sometimes considered supportive, sometimes considered unsupportive of optimal team functioning. So what is a group norm? How do we define it? One way to define it is this way, that we can say the group norms are the often unwritten rules by which groups know how to behave in a range of situations. And this literally can be from anywhere from eating a meal to interacting with outsiders. Often what we're trying to focus on, though, when it comes to team or group norms are the underlying drivers of behavior within the team's day-to-day functioning. We need to understand that norms are not necessarily actual behaviors, but the behaviors point to norms. So if we see that somebody is looking at their phone, which is an often complained about behavior, the norm is not that someone's looking at their phone. The norm is that it's okay for people to look at their phones during meetings, even if it's a distraction. If somebody shows up late to a meeting, the behavior is they're showing up late, 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever. The norm is that around here, it's okay that people are late to meetings. So it is based in behavior, it is observed in behavior and attitudes, but the norm is something that's a little bit more foundational the way we describe it. When we think about typical norms, sometimes we think about things like, do we talk critically about people who are not in the group, either in the moment about group members or about people who are not in it at all? In other words, do we, talk critically about people, bash people, that kind of thing? Do we work all hours on group activities? In other words, is there a work ethic there that takes us sometimes into the late hours working on something, or is there a different kind of a norm? Are we helping others in the group when asked, or even when we're not asked? In other words, is there a proactive, support each other kind of culture within the group that we see the norms supporting that, or is it something that doesn't exist? Not criticizing group leaders. Is this a good thing or is this not a good thing? This is something that the group or the team has to establish. And this was one of those things that gets established pretty quickly. If there is a team leader, typically it's how the team leader responds if someone offers a criticism of what's going on. If the team leader allows it and facilitates it and tries to understand what the criticism is all about, assuming the criticism is not mean-spirited, but if it's really just honest feedback, then we'll understand pretty quickly whether or not it's okay. And what kind of language are we using? One of the things we think about is, are there little, as we say, little isms or acronyms or things that we do? I remember a number of years ago working with an organization, a very large one, that had kind of a thing that would happen in meetings where people would do what we call posturing. Meaning if there were 12, 15 people in a team meeting, team members, not all of them, but many of them would posture, meaning they would start talking about how great a job they did on something. And you'd see one person after another kind of do this, and you start to wonder, why is this a norm? What is going on here that it's good for team members, or it's okay for team members to boast or feel the need to explain how effective they are? So that's just a question mark. When it comes to looking at team norms, group norms, it can be really helpful to avoid evaluating a norm as good or bad, but rather look at a norm as it shows up in behavior, as whether or not it is supporting the team's objectives or interfering with the team's objectives. So I've certainly been, as maybe other people have as well, in meetings where people do look at their phones and check their text messages while someone's talking, and people seem to think that's okay. It may bother you if you're part of that group, and now it's a question of whether you want to raise it. But if there is a group norm that around here it's okay for people to check their phones during a conversation in a meeting, if the team is achieving its goals and overall it's working effectively, maybe it's not a big problem. If, on the other hand, it is interfering with team performance, then it has to be brought up. And it can be tricky because people will resist. And that's something we're going to take a look at in terms of some of the more common examples of group norms. Some are often perceived as more negative than others, and then we'll talk about how we can both create more effective norms and perhaps change the ones that are interfering with having a better experience. Let's look now at a few examples of norms that appear often in teams and groups, and for some they may seem positive and supportive, and for others they may be perceived as negative. But like I said earlier, you don't necessarily want to jump on the idea that something is absolutely positive or negative, simply whether it supports effective performance or whether it interferes with it. It's okay to come late to meetings. Now we have to think about what that means by coming late to meetings. But if it's a habit and actually prevents a meeting from starting on time, or if somebody comes in and with it we say it's okay that not only is the person coming in late, but we're now going to interrupt the meeting and welcome the person and bring them up to speed, this can be frustrating. So maybe it is okay to come late to meetings if there's a justifiable reason. Certainly most people would agree that if something comes up for someone that's an emergency, that's certainly okay. The question becomes, is this a chronic issue that interferes with what the group is trying to achieve? It's okay to interrupt meetings with phone calls or texts. This is up to the team to decide, is this good or is this bad? Most people, when you think about it, think, well, this is kind of a pain. You know, when this happens, interrupts the flow. But many teams live with it, and the question becomes, is it really okay, or is it just something that people are living with because they're afraid to speak up? Around here, we do not disagree with each other openly. Is this helpful? Many people would say this is very detrimental. Imagine being in a meeting where nobody disagrees and everyone seems to support each other in saying yes, 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 everyone's right. Around here we vote on key decisions. A lot of people would think this is a positive one, and it may be. But sometimes we might have to make decisions that we need to make very quickly, and maybe there's no time for a vote. Again, it's a question of whether or not this is a valuable norm or something that's detrimental. It's okay to postpone solutions to immediate problems. Is it? It's okay not to follow through on previous agreements. A lot of people would say that this is a negative norm. Again, if it's happening, are you willing to stand up and say, folks, this is not working for me or for the team. Can we address this? Why do we not follow through? People who work in this field would probably tell you if people aren't following through on previous agreements, you probably didn't have an agreement in the first place. So the question then becomes, do we explore how we actually reach agreement in a team? That brings up another norm. It's okay to not show up to a meeting without contacting team members. I see this happen with students. They'll sometimes complain that, a student just doesn't show up to a meeting. Nobody likes that. So the question is, why is it permitted? Around here, team members often notify via last-minute text they are not coming to the meeting. This is almost as bad as the previous one for many teams. But again, it is up to the team to decide whether it's something they want to accept or not. Team members hold each other accountable for commitments made to the team. Kind of opposite to one we heard a few moments ago. So if team members hold each other accountable for commitments, that means sometimes there will be uncomfortable conversations if someone doesn't follow through. That's a norm that can be very powerful. And again, if people are not being held accountable for their commitments, what value is there to the commitment to begin with? We sustain a safe environment where team members know it is okay to be completely honest. It sounds wonderful. Everybody's completely honest and open. And if you ask people, they would say, yeah, I really want to have that. What happens in practice is there are often limits. Sometimes people, because they're not used to doing it or they don't have the skill sometimes, they may say things in a way that's quite harsh. Are we able to work through that? A lot of people will say we have a policy that we always want to hear the honest truth. And yet in practice, it's interfered with in one way or another. Either people are looked at strangely, perhaps there's peer pressure to not bring something up. If it's 5 minutes left in the meeting after an hour and a half, and someone says, folks, I am concerned that our commitments are not being held up. Are you prepared to deal with the heat that will probably come by bringing it up? If this is truly a norm, then the environment will be safe and team members will know it's okay to be completely honest. And the last one, around here we stick to the agenda, even if something needs more time and input than planned. People will often complain that meetings run late or we're always in meetings. This is probably more of an issue about the effectiveness of a meeting to begin with. However, if something really does need more time, will we give it more time? Are we willing to? And sometimes you have to have that discussion at the beginning of a meeting. And essentially, when we think about how a team or a group is operating, so often we have to look at how we are together when we are meeting, when we are all in one room or perhaps on a similar conference call or video conference. What are the norms that are taking place? Just like human beings have a conscious awareness and a big part of us that is unconscious or in the subconscious, so too teams and groups have what is conscious and what is below the surface, what is unconscious. And what's really helpful to a team in the long run is being able to look at both sides of it. Do we really have an open and safe environment where people can be honest, or are we just saying it? And is someone willing to say, no, I don't feel that way? What if you're the only one of 10 people and you don't feel it's safe to be honest? Are you willing to talk about it? Maybe part of it is your responsibility, maybe part of it is the team. One of the best things you can do for the long-term success of a team is be able to have those conversations periodically and really address the issues that are interfering underneath. And remarkable things can happen to the performance of a team overall. So how do we actually create norms? If a team just comes together and starts to meet and talk about a project, the norms will start to emerge pretty quickly without people saying much. What's more effective is to have the conversation, which does take more time. But to have the conversation about what we're trying to create and what kind of behavior we're trying to support so that we can be successful. So how do norms appear? Sometimes it is a matter of decree. The team either saying or the team leader deciding that things are going to be a certain way. Team leaders have to be careful about this though. If they do it on their own, will the team support them, or will there be a bit of a subversion underneath and sort of erode some of those norms that the person's hoping to sustain? Really important to not only get buy-in, to really get a conversation going about those norms to ensure people are on board with it. What happens in some organizational cultures, perhaps in all organizational cultures to some degree, the team or the group norms will reflect the cultural norms. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not a good thing, and that's up to the team to decide. If you want to have a truly unique and powerful team or group experience, you need to be consciously thinking about what will sustain us in the best possible way. Sometimes these norms are planned. Sometimes they emerge accidentally, we might say. And it starts with something where, let's say somebody's late for a meeting by 5 minutes and everyone goes, oh, that's okay, please don't be late next time. And then the next meeting the person's late 5, 6, 7 minutes again. This is going to slowly start giving permission for people to be late to a meeting unless it is nipped in the bud, unless it's caught early. So this is what we mean in terms of emerging accidentally. But what really we mean is it's unconsciously. It's starting to happen and people might be afraid to speak up. If it's something that's planned, somebody shows up late and we say, okay, the person's late, let's talk about this. Is it okay for someone to be 5 minutes late? And it can be. But it may be worth a conversation to ensure that whatever the norm that emerges is deliberate and planned and supportive. And so whether something is planned or it emerges, we need to be aware of its longer term effects, especially for the team leader. A last comment about how norms are created has to do with the group having that conversation as we mentioned earlier. So if you look at norms that are occurring in an existing group, if you ask team members, how are these behaviors being supported? How are these norms existing? Sometimes people can't explain it. They might not even know. But if they really think about it, there is what we call a thin edge of a wedge moment, a moment where something started and people might have just accepted it. Maybe we thought it was just a small thing. Someone took, their phone out and just said, "Oh, excuse me, guys, I have to just address this one little text." And then another meeting, maybe two people did it, or the same people did it twice. And we start to adapt to the norm. And we start to realize after a while that we're starting to adapt to an awful lot of things. And then we have to sort of question, how did this all start and what is my responsibility in it? So all in all, the best way to establish norms within a group or team is by having an actual conversation about these things. If there's team contracting involved, this is the kind of thing to start to bring up. How are we going to respond to things? What is our commitment to excellence? What is our focus of the team? And what are the kinds of things we want to support in terms of the team dynamic that are going to help us get there? What kind of accountability do we want to establish? It takes time. Some people say to me, well, we don't have time. We're just going to meet. Fine. If you make that choice, be aware that you're making that choice. And it may work out. Because if you work with people who are professionals and have experience, you may not need to worry about accountability because people are just naturally accountable based on their experience and training. But be aware that it is worthwhile to really have a conversation within the team and propose things as team members. What do you think about this, guys? What do you think about ensuring that we have a meeting time every Monday at 3 p.m. And if we don't need it, we can cancel. But if we put it into the calendar, we don't have to worry about trying to squeezing it into the calendar every time. Having a pre-established meeting time and supporting it can be a wonderful norm that gives teams actually a lot of freedom. So that if you don't need the time, you can cancel it, which is much, much easier. So have the conversation and clarify. Very important to clarify what those norms are that you want, and you will find yourself with a lot more success. A couple of last things about norms. If you're joining a team that already exists, absolutely there are norms of behavior, there is no doubt. And you may not always know what those are. You can actually ask people, how do we get things done around here? Like, how do people, what's accountability like in the team, that kind of thing. And certainly people will be able to give you some answers to those questions because they'll be able to observe the behavior. They may not know the root source of those norms or how they got started, but sometimes just asking that question will allow people to become more aware of what the actual norms of behavior are within the team. When we join a team, typically we want to join, we want to fit in, we want to connect. And so you may step on toes, so to speak, because you're violating norms without even realizing it. And that's kind of normal, if I can borrow that word. There are so many times people will come through into a situation, maybe they'll join a team meeting for the first time and there's 11 team members there and you're a guest. It's helpful to sort of observe and see how are people behaving. If you're unsure, for example, whether it's okay to text somebody during a meeting, just look around, and even if somebody's doing it, you may want to hold back and see, is that really condoned or not? Be mindful of language. If you can, talk to people in advance to try to get a sense of it, and do your best to observe. And as you become more connected to the team, if you're joining the team permanently, you will learn what the norms are. And once you earn the trust of the team members as a new person who's joined, then maybe you can start to initiate a conversation about why things are done a certain way. If you try to change norms right away as soon as you join, you're going to get an awful lot of resistance, unless it's something that's really bothering people anyway. I've certainly been in meetings where I've joined groups or teams for the first time, and I'd noticed that people, let's say, talk over each other. So one person's talking over one spot, and then another side of the room, somebody else is talking to somebody else, and people aren't really listening to each other. And I remember asking, is this kind of normal? Do people have these simultaneous conversations? And one person said to me, yeah, it's normal. We don't like it very much, but we just allow it because people can't seem to control themselves. Now, that's a great explanation, and it's very honest. But I'm not there long enough to be able to have any credibility to say, hey guys, why are you guys doing this? I'm not the team leader. I'm a brand new member, and I haven't earned that opportunity yet. It may come up in the second or third time we're together, or even sooner than that. But right away, I don't have permission of the team to really raise those norms. So you can do it, and it may allow the opportunity to make a change, but it's a very high risk. However, don't forget to bring it up when you have that opportunity. And by the way, you don't need to wait that long. Like I said, it might be the second meeting or third meeting that you're in, as you become more accustomed to the team and they become more accustomed to you, that you have that opportunity to make the changes you think might be helpful, or at least to propose them. And the last thing is, what's the kind of language we use when we describe a norm? When you're forming a norm, you want to start thinking about things like we have here. Let's go back to the examples above. And if we go above, you'll see here at the examples we look at that there's some language here that's used. And for those people who work with norms professionally, people that look at group norms and team norms to study them, sometimes the language we use is around here. Because we can start saying, well, around here, we don't really care about deadlines. We let deadlines come and go, but we seem to be okay. Or around here, we stick to the agenda no matter what. Once we form an agenda, we're stuck with it and everything's absolutely fine and we don't care, we just steamroll ahead. Another way to say it is, it's okay to not follow through on previous commitments, or it's okay to not show up to a meeting without contacting team members. And so these are observational kinds of phrases. We can be more direct. We can say we sustain an environment where team members know it is okay to be completely honest. So these are the kinds of sentences and phrases we use to help language the norms. And always remember, an individual behavior is not a norm. The norm underpins the behavior. And so you need to think about that. So that's why we say around here we do this, or it's okay to do this. Because based on the behavior that keeps showing up over and over again, it must be okay. Again, I go back to the texting example, where it happens a lot, but a lot of people complain about it. So that's an odd dichotomy. And so when you want to language it and say, around here, we do not look at our phones at any time during meetings unless it's a legitimate emergency. That is a great norm to introduce. If you want to permit it, you can say, around here, it's okay to send an occasional text message or to look at your phone periodically because we're all so busy. Either is fine if it really is fine with the team and it actually supports your performance. So always keep that in mind when you're trying to create them. And the last piece of advice around that, of course, is to make sure whatever norm you want to see established with your team, and it's always best to do it early on, make sure you have that conversation and you truly have commitment. Because another norm that's really important is that if you really want to have commitment, you need to have honesty and you need to have an environment where it's safe to be honest. And a norm that really is supportive of that might be, around here, we have an honest and open environment where people feel safe to speak their minds.